The entire premise of gender transition is a lie, and we are lying to these people. We're doing these kids a great disservice by allowing them to believe that the way that they're born is wrong, and that they have to fix themselves, and the only way to do so is through experimental, lifelong treatment.
Sure.
They deserve better. People would often gravitate between two extremes, either going all the way in the direction of affirmation, just affirm these people, regardless of the consequences for them, or they would actually hate these transgender people or these people who are struggling with these feelings around their sex. The medical professionals at multiple steps of the way, not just beginning with therapy, but also when I was going in for surgery consultations, really drilled that into my mom and dad's head that I was going to die without this if I was not allowed to do it. I had more pushback trying to go on hormones than I did for the surgery.
Really?
Yeah.
And how old were you at this time?
I was 15.
You're 15.
I couldn't even legally drive yet by this point in time, and I was already already undergoing surgery. And I just had this moment of like, is this like a huge thing that I lost? Like, I'm not going to be able to breastfeed my kids.
Are they saying anything true? Because usually the most effective lies come when there's at least a kernel of truth there that makes them far more persuasive. They, take hold in a cultural setting. And so, yeah, I'm wondering to hear your perspective, and then I'll share mine on if there's anything that this community is getting right, even though there's still this underlying lie that you can change sex. A lot of males, if they were to walk into some parts of society with a dress and maybe they fell in love with the look of dresses, they're not trying to deceive anybody about their sex or anything, but they're just like expressing themselves in this way. It's like a healthy version of cross-dressing rather than this like having to work to try to trick people thing. I think there's not a lot of support for people like that.
Right. A lot of cultures have like male skirts.
Yeah.
And it's more practical for guys because, well, I don't need to say much.
Wait, no, I don't get it.
It's more practical for guys because you need like a little bit more space than what's
It is
like
nice.
pants might
It is
sometimes
nice
allow.
to have some breathing room. I hear you. I hear you loud and clear.
And it's breezy. It's nice.
Sweets. All right, let's get going. Finally, we got here.
What a crazy day already.
I know, right? All right, so welcome back to the Virtue Vibes podcast. I'm your host, Jared Blair, and I'm joined by the amazing Chloe Cole. She is a prolific speaker and activist. I actually had to drag her away from a news studio just 5 minutes ago to get her on the show, and
2 news broadcasts.
two news broadcasts. But we made it
within
happen.
an hour of each other.
Yeah, exactly. So, but yeah, it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So yeah, first, I think a lot of my listeners might not know who you are. I just met you about an hour ago in person for the first time. So yeah, just answer this any way you'd like. Who is Chloe Cole?
Chloe Cole is many things, but you may know her as a detransitioner and an advocate for the rights of children and parents. And I speak on behalf of my own experiences and my family's experiences with the healthcare system medicalizing me for feelings that I feel like are perfectly normal for most adolescent girls to go through, frankly. I started to question my identity around my sex at around the age of 12 after going through a bit of an early puberty and years of being a little bit of a social outcast in school, and also just being a tomboyish girl who was having some pretty natural struggles with growing up from a girl into a woman. And my exposure to transgender ideology was through social media. It was through the internet, which I primarily started using as a means of socializing.
Yeah.
And I came across this in communities that were more centered around like my own personal interests. So stuff like illustration or video games or like shows that I watched or comics that I read.
Yeah.
Um, I started to see more and more users that were identifying as transgender or as a part of the LGBT in some form. And at the time, like I was like, I think I was like 11, 12 ish when I started seeing this because that was how old I was when I started getting my first phone, when I got my first phone. And it was just such an interesting subject to me for so many reasons. It was very intellectually stimulating to me.
Hmm.
Um, Especially like all of like like the medical and philosophical literature around transgenderism.
Yeah.
Um, but also like even from a personal standpoint, I wasn't directly like speaking to any of these kids until I was about a year into my transition. But it was just so interesting, like coming across other young people who are so similar to me in so many different ways to the point that like I started to really ruminate on this and question like why do I feel so attached to this subject? Why do I feel so attached to this group of people? Until eventually like I started to think about it from I started to kind of apply it to myself.
Hmm.
It's it started with questioning my sexuality because there were like female celebrities and like female classmates that I had like romantic and sexual feelings toward from a young age.
Yeah.
In the same way that I had romantic feelings for boys. Um, and then I started to think like, I don't really entirely feel like I'm 100% like the girls who I know or even like my own female family members. And I feel like my female role models, I just don't connect to
Hmm.
a whole lot on a personal level. And I really started to feel that the older that I got, the more tomboyish I got, and the more I enjoy the company of boys and young men rather than people of my sex.
Hmm.
And I started because I was so focused on this. It was like, well, maybe it's because I just was never meant to be a girl.
Hmm.
I think that I was supposed to be a boy all along, and that's why I don't feel comfortable in my body and with all these changes that are happening from puberty. And eventually, I told friends at school that I was a boy, and then I told my older sister. And when it came time to tell my mom and dad about it, um, I mean, I was very anxious to do so because as much as I wanted them to know, I was also really worried about how they would react and what they would say to me.
Hmm.
So I didn't know how to start the conversation until I saw online there was another girl who called herself a boy and she wrote a letter to her mother, a coming out letter. And I decided to do the same thing because it was like, wow, this is genius. Like, it gives me a way of doing this that kind of gives me, my mom and dad space and some time to think about it and what we're going to say to each other.
Sure.
Um, and when we finally did, I mean, they were, I would say that they were fairly supportive, but not trying to push me into any particular direction.
Hmm.
They wanted me to they want to allow me to like experiment with like how I cut my hair, the clothing that I wore, and even like names I chose, and even try to like call me their son.
So they did right away. They were trying to, or they went along with calling you their son.
Well, yeah, they did a little bit of research first.
Yeah.
They immediately like went to the internet and like whatever
Hmm.
like resources they could find to see like, okay, what do we do for our kid now that she's going through this, because this is
Yeah.
totally new to them. Like
Yeah.
no parent expects their kid to be like, I'm transgender. i'm
Hmm.
actually not I'm actually not the way that I was born, and I have like these strong feelings around my body.
Yeah.
Like I feel like that's very shocking for most parents, and it might be like even like a little quite a bit stressful to see your kid going through that. And if you expect that of your child, I think there's a problem with you.
Yeah.
um
I feel
but
like only parents who like are on these same social media platforms like with their kids might go along. But I feel like a lot
I
of
mean, there is a
parents.
legitimate phenomenon of parents basically forcing or coercing their children to transition from a very early age.
Oh
Some
yeah.
as early as like infancy or toddlerhood.
Yeesh.
Um, they're called Transhausen parents, which is a portmanteau of the words transgender,
Yeah.
and Munchausen by proxy, which is like, if you don't know what that is, it's basically like a condition where like a caretaker or a parents is, they're like claiming that their child or whoever they're taking care of has a condition that they don't, and
Hmm.
like often like it'll involve them like forcing them to present like almost like gaslighting them to believing that they have this condition,
Hmm.
or like even forcing them to go on medication that they don't need.
Yeah.
But my mom and dad were absolutely not that. They were just concerned about my well-being, and they wanted to get the best answer for me that they could.
Hmm.
And everything that they saw pointed them in the direction of affirmation and of getting me to see a medical professional right away.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it made sense to them. They didn't know how to help me through this exactly, but they could. They knew that this was a psychological issue for me that stemmed from my body image issues, from going through puberty, from being a bit of an offbeat, tomboyish girl. Um, so they were pretty sensible.
Hmm.
When I started going to therapy, I mean, it was kind of shocking for all of us actually, because I was going in with the thought like, okay, they're gonna help me to go further into transitioning, and my mom and dad were thinking that they were going to stall a bit. The doctors were just going to have me wait until I was at least like legally an adult, right?
Hmm.
And then I would be more capable of making such a huge like personal decision around that, especially one that would affect my health. And if I were to start as a kid, like the course of my physical and my physical and reproductive developments. Um, but my mom and dad were not allowed to partake in these therapy sessions. They were not allowed to be in the room without my express consent.
Hmm.
And because in the state of California, um, children are emancipated at the age of 12 when it comes to mental health care. So they can just see a therapist
Yeah.
and do basically anything like psychological or psychiatric
Yeah.
without the involvement of their parents, like at all.
Interesting. I didn't know
Um,
that.
Yeah, and they didn't know that either.
Yeah.
So they were getting kind of concerned actually, because like I was going to therapy and I was like, I was becoming more distressed actually, because I felt like I wasn't getting the help that I needed, and they felt the same way, even though we had different opinions on what that help would actually look like.
Hmm.
Um, so eventually time came for them to get their get themselves involved. They started to talk to the psychologists themselves, and they're like, "What's going on? Like, what's going on in these appointments that we cannot be involved in?
Hmm.
What is she? What is she going through right now that she's not telling us?
And you said you were getting
What's?
worse after
Yeah,
the
I was getting
appointment.
worse,
So,
and they're like, why does she want to do this so early? Like, what is the rush for her to be doing this when she's still a kid?
hmm.
It might not be what she wants. It could be risky. If she ends up regretting this down the line, what's going to happen from there on? All very
Yeah.
sensible questions that they should be asking.
Yeah. Of course.
And the psychologists just told them, like, well, that's not what you should be concerned about, actually. Um, this is just her identity. It's an innate part of who she is. And by pushing back against this in any form, you're denying her of her right to be who she is. And if you don't allow her to go on these treatments um, at the age that she is, um, because she's being denied life-saving care, you could be risking your child's suicide. And the
Jeez.
reason why they said that was because within the transgender community, there is a high rate of suicidal ideation, attempts, and completed suicides.
Yeah.
And a lot of activists and even medical professionals, like in my case, will falsely attribute this to a lack of medicalization,
Mhm.
um, when in fact the hormonal treatments actually um, do not affect the suicide rate, but um, I think blockers and surgeries, especially the genital surgeries, definitely.
Yeah.
Um, after they're completed, the suicide rate actually goes up because of things like regrets and
Yeah.
because of the horrific complications that come with these treatments, which they didn't
Gotcha.
disclose to my parents, of course, and they didn't disclose um, that the rate of desistance without intervention actually is quite high in children who just go through puberty and just are allowed to grow up without being
Okay.
affirmed in any way. My
Yeah.
mom and dad had no idea about this, but they were told also that the regret rate was less than like 1 or 2%. And with
Yeah.
odds like that, stacked against the odds that they were told that I was going to commit suicide,
Yeah.
it was like, wow, so we really have no other choice for our daughter. The medical professionals at multiple steps of the way, not just beginning with therapy, but also when I was going in for surgery consultations, really drilled that into my mom and dad's head that I was going to die without this if I was not allowed
Constantly.
to do it. And I mean, it's really the single greatest fear that any parent could have
Sure.
concerning their children. No,
Sure.
no mother, no father wants to outlive their own child.
Yeah.
So I would argue that even though mom and dad signed off on treatment, actually I think they only required the signature of one of my parents. So I think it was just my mom who had signed off. But even
Hmm.
though my mom signed off, I wouldn't consider it consent.
Yeah.
I think it's absolutely they were manipulated and they were coerced into a treatment that not only did not help me but also caused me harm, and it was completely unnecessary. This was medical fraud.
Yeah. Jeez.
And so I was halfway through my 8th grade year when I began my first intervention medically, which was the puberty blocker.
Mhm.
They injected, I think it was about 4 injections of this drug called Lupron over the course of about a year to a year and a half period. And this is a drug that previously has been used in patients who have late stage cancers, especially like reproductive cancers, like I think breast cancer, and testicular cancer. I think it's also been used to treat like endometriosis and similar conditions. But it's also been used in sex offender populations in prisons to chemically castrate them. It's a chemical castration drug. Um, but a lot of facilities have stopped using it because it's so harsh on the
Yeah.
body. They 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 claim that it's too cruel for use in sex offenders, and yet we're administering this to completely healthy
Still today.
children. Yes. Um, and it's not an easy drug for the body to take. I was already like 4 years into puberty by this point in time because I had an early puberty.
Mhm.
And because like my hormone production and the function of my ovaries was completely stopped by these injections, I basically experienced like a temporary childhood onset menopause.
Hmm.
So I was experiencing all these weird side effects. Like um before I think the 2 week mark, um It's caused me to have like a very heavy period, which I was told of, and it's just a consequence of the hormone levels in my body
Mhm.
um, going down, because that's how periods work.
Mhm.
Um, but after that, like I started having like hot flashes, which if you're not familiar, it's like, for me, the experience was like having these uncomfortable waves of heat in my body, this weird, like hot sensation just moving throughout my torso and my limbs. And it was accompanied by like these other sensations of like itching and tingling. And like I was uncontrollably sweating because like I felt hot.
Yeah.
So like I didn't even want to wear like sweaters or like jackets in the winter time, because it was so uncomfortable and I felt so warm.
Yeah.
Um and this was like a daily occurrence. Sometimes it would like interrupt my sleep at times, or like my studies. And emotionally, like I was very numb because I wasn't having like a normal healthy cycle.
Mhm.
I just felt like I wasn't really like getting like the gratification that I would out of like normal things that I would enjoy in my daily life. Um so it was very strange to be on alone. And about a month or so later was when I received my first injection of the testosterone.
And how old were
Um,
you
I
for
I
this?
was 13. I was the same
13,
age,
same
13 and a
age.
half. Not yet finished with my 8th grade year of middle school yet.
Wow.
Yeah. So very early to be going on these interventions. Um, and it helped to alleviate some of the symptoms of not having any sex hormones in my body. The hot flashes didn't completely go away until after I stopped taking the Lupron.
Mhm.
But of course, like there was the expected physical changes, like the change in my face. My face started masculinize a little bit. My jawline, my cheekbones, and everything started to like become more angular. Um, the hair, like literally everywhere on my body, got like way thicker. Like on top of
Oh,
my
really?
head, my eyebrows, my eyelashes,
Okay.
my face. I started developing a little bit of facial hair.
Yeah.
Um, and I started to grow a little bit of muscle even without a whole lot of effort. So that was pretty interesting. I
Yeah.
felt kind of handsome actually. Like
Yeah.
it was like, wow, I'm starting to look like a young man.
Testosterone's a hell of a drug.
It really is. Oh my gosh. My voice really started to drop. I guess I got my dad's like vocal genes, because I had a very deep voice. Like the way that I sound now does not give any justice to just how deep my voice was during my adolescence. Like
Really?
it was deeper than like all the other teenage boys actually.
Oh, wow.
Pretty much, yeah. I, um, I got a lot of compliments on my voice during my high school years. Um, and then there are like emotional changes too, because sex hormones affect like literally every part of our health, including like our behavior, our thought patterns, the way that we think and feel and process emotions and emotional stimuli.
Mhm.
Um, I felt like an entirely different person. Like the moment that I started on it, um, I just became super confident, and I would do a lot of stuff that I wouldn't normally do. Like I just started to partake like in a lot of like risky behavior that I wouldn't have otherwise. Like I
Mm.
started like when I was in high school. I used to be like a totally straight edge kid. I went from that to like starting to like drink with my friends, or like
Yeah.
smoke marijuana, or like basically do like whatever I could get my hands on.
Yeah.
And even just like even like really stupid stuff, like I don't know, like jumping fences and trespassing.
Yeah.
it might
And
it,
just
it could it could I think it was like a combination of the testosterone and uh probably just like being like any other stupid teenager.
yeah.
Not a good combo. Really not a good combo
Yeah.
for a little teenage girl. Um I was not only like overconfident and like very risky,
Yeah.
um, but it also made it so that it was like a lot harder to process like negative emotions. So I would get angry a
Mm.
lot more easily. Um, it also like maybe developed like a bit of a competitive streak, which again
Sure.
another not very good combo. Um, and it started to eventually make it so that like I kind of burned some bridges because like I wasn't I had such a hard time like dealing with like some hardships that were going on in my life during that
Hmm.
time, um, and in such an unhealthy way, that I really didn't have like a good outlet for a lot of those things during that time. Um, and perhaps like one of the most uncomfortable psychological side effects was the increase in my sex drive because, of course, I'm taking massive, massive doses of male sex hormones.
Yeah.
And I mean, that proved very troublesome over the years. I didn't have like proper like male guidance around that because, of
Hmm.
course, like I'm not going to like go to like my male family members and especially not my dad and be like, hey, like I'm dealing with this trouble because
Yeah.
that's so awkward. And
Yeah.
like the doctor who prescribed this to me was a woman.
Hmm.
So she didn't women just don't
They
know
don't
what it's they don't
understand.
know
They don't
they don't know
understand
how
what
hard it is to
testosterone does.
they don't, not only
Yeah.
go through like the physical changes but also
Yeah.
like the emotional changes that come with it. So I didn't really feel like I had anywhere to turn. And yet I was if I were to describe it, it was like I already had this habit of fixating on things.
Hmm.
Um, but because like I had like this strong increase in this particular emotion, it was basically in my head 24/7. And that was incredibly stressful on its own. But I
Yeah.
also like I even as like I started to pass as a member of the opposite sex and I started to integrate into like the male social role,
Hmm.
I was still lonely. And the affirmation of like not only like the changes that I was going through physically, but also like of being perceived as a guy, eventually it just wasn't enough for me. Like I still had all the issues and the loneliness that I had before.
Hmm.
And so I started to look for another outlets. And there were a lot of people online there were a lot of like people online who gave me like very, very sexual attention.
Oh wow.
And oftentimes like it was like older, like adult males who would prey on these vulnerabilities that I had.
Yeah.
And like I already had some sexual trauma um from before and early on in my transition. And eventually it led to more abuse down the line because of that.
Hmm.
It's just incredibly tragic how it happened and how I just wasn't getting the help that I really needed.
Yeah.
Now, going into my high school years, I started treatment when I was in eighth grade, and I just didn't bother like having like a coming out or anything like that to my peers. 'Cause it was like, what's the point when I've like known like some of these people since kindergarten?
Hmm.
I'm not gonna be fooling anybody. It doesn't matter what I'm taking or what I look like.
Yeah.
It's just gonna be weird for
Don't.
them, and it was weird because none of them knew. And all of a sudden, like one day, like this girl who they had seen like start to develop into a young woman, start to develop like breasts and stuff,
Yeah.
start to have a deep voice that went lower and lower and lower,
Hmm.
start to cut her hair, start to grow muscle and bigger shoulders and
Yeah.
everything. Um, but once like I went into high school, like ev- everybody was like, okay, well now she's like all the teachers like calling her like by this guy name, so we're gonna do the same. And she looks like a dude, so what other choice do I have?
Hmm.
And most of my peers in school were all new. It was a school with like a bunch of new faces.
Yeah.
So most people actually didn't know that I was actually just like a young teenage girl. They just
So
saw
you
like they
passed
just saw
very
yeah,
thoroughly.
I passed as a member of the opposite as a member of the opposite sex. They just knew me as this young dude named Leo.
Yeah.
And there were a few times when I was like outed behind my back and people would like come up to me or they would like DM me after school and be like, I had no idea.
Yeah.
Like, what do you mean you're young? You're a woman? Uh,
Interesting.
um,
When I
really,
when I was a kid, I would like think about what it'd be like to live a day in the life like as a female or something like that. And
it
you
was really
actually got to
interesting. I
experience
got like
that.
a really interesting perspective on what it's like on the other side that like almost like no women do. Um, it was kind of exciting. It was kind of fun at times actually,
Yeah.
because it was just a completely different dynamic. Um, like all of a sudden, like I wasn't half bad looking. Okay, so there were girls who like actually started to like develop crushes on me,
Yeah.
and it was really weird. Like like a lot of women just think that they don't have to have any boundaries when it comes to young men because like they're dealing with the stronger sex and
Hmm.
they're tough, so they can put up with pretty much anything, right? And they're not as emotional, right? So we can do just pretty much anything.
Yeah.
It got pretty weird sometimes. It got pretty weird. There were girls who would like try like they would like try to like fill up on like my arms and stuff. They would try to like
Yeah.
force me to like kiss them. And there was this one
Really?
time at lunch, like during a lunch period, where there were these two girls who were like giggling and like following me around the campus and like taking photos and videos of me. And like when it got to the point that like another one of my friends had to intervene and be like, "Stop! Like, what are you doing?"
Oh my
Uh,
gosh.
uh
You must have been a better
real-
looking guy than I was at that age because you got way more attention than me.
dude, I was a short king. I don't, I,
Oh
I don't know.
man.
I don't know how I did it. Like I didn't like put any effort into that at all. And it kind of sucked because like I'm like I've always been like primarily attracted to men, and now
Mhm.
like I'm straight as a line, and I really like I was like watching all my friends like get into like new like romantic relationships for the first time, and I was
Mhm.
still behind because it was like, okay, my dating pool is women who I'm either not attracted to or I don't want to get into a relationship with because I don't want to like break their heart, right? And
Mhm.
like I don't want them to like find out like I'm transgender and just be completely disappointed. Like I just did not want to get into that.
Yeah.
And then with guys, like my dating pool was either like grown ass men or like high school graduates like trying to get with me,
Mhm.
or it was like guys at school who I had no business getting involved with, like guys who were like selling like pot or like they were like chain smoking every day before school.
Gotcha.
I had no interest at all. Um, and that was part of what led to the loneliness post transition, um, or like mid transition. Um, and I mean, as for other parts of the social experience, it was like now like I was like making friends with other guys like as a guy and like basically like being one of the guys.
Mhm.
And I was even using like male restroom and locker room facilities, which was not only dangerous because it's not like I wasn't actually a guy, right? Like I still had like fully intact female genitalia. So if somebody knew
Mhm.
who I actually was, like I could have been in danger. But it was also kind of nasty. Like some of the
Oh,
stuff that like I would see
for
like
sure.
in the high school boys restrooms, dude. Like I'm
I try to
I
block it out of my memory.
we're not going there. We're not going there. The things that the human eyes can see. It's too much for me sometimes. But eventually like I started to realize like it just felt like I was putting on a mask every day. Like
Mm.
okay, everybody thinks I'm a guy, but it's not like I'm like not reliance on weekly injections to keep up this like medical facade. And also like I was wearing this binder, this compression device to like basically like squish my breasts
Yeah.
into my body to make it look like I didn't have any. And there were a lot of moments where like I just didn't know what to do or like what was expected of me. And when I
Mhm.
did, it was like this is not the life that I expected or
Yeah.
frankly want to live. Like there's a lot less room for expression of any kind for men than there is for women, both
Mm.
like in like particularly like in clothing or just like being like an animated kind of person. Like
Sure.
I am naturally a very expressive person,
Yeah.
and to kind of like to have to mute that a little bit, and also not be able to really have anybody to reach out to in moments where I was having like a tough time. Like
Mhm.
as a young man, I was just expected to like tough it out and like not really talk about it a whole lot.
Mhm.
And when I did, it just didn't feel fulfilling because either people wouldn't understand, or because like of the mental effects of taking testosterone, it was like talking it out just didn't help.
Hmm.
Like I started to realize I was struggling with like this feeling of lacking a purpose.
Sure.
And I think like my transition was a means of trying to find that purpose, that identity. But after years of living in that identity, it just became just another part of my life and I wasn't focused on it anymore. So it was like, okay, what's next?
Yeah.
And I didn't know where to go. And more, it started to become like a roadblock in my developments in so many different ways. And I really just started to fall into this deep, deep depression by the time that I was in my sophomore year. And it was like really getting me into some deep shit with like this like starting like the substance abuse, like being groomed by adults over the
Jeez.
internet. Um, it got bad. Like there were like at one point like people were like almost like trying to get me to like meet at like local hotels.
Oh my
I
gosh.
could have been in so much danger.
Yeah.
Um, like I was just going through all this stuff and it just put me in such a dark place. And even though like it was to the point that like I was diagnosed with depression, I was medicated for that, and then
Mhm.
I was put on um ADHD meds because I was previously diagnosed with ADHD when I was um I think when I was around like eight or nine, and then medicated for it when I was in my tween years. And then they saw that like my school performance was failing because I was so depressed that they were just like, okay, let's put another band-aid onto this.
Man.
And in spite of all of that, I was allowed to go through the next intervention, which was surgery.
They were like, "This is going fine. Let's keep moving forward
Yeah.
with it."
I mean, if anything, they probably attributed the distress that I was in to a lack of further medicalization. And like it started with my therapist. I was talking about like how I was just sick of having boobs still, sick of binding every day because I live in the middle of California, and you're in the
Right.
Phoenix area, so you know how hot and dry it gets in the western part of the United
For
States.
sure.
I'd be walking home in like 3 layers of clothing because of this stupid thing, and it was tight. It was just not something that I wanted to
Yeah.
wear every day. But I also didn't want to be able to see that part of my body. I didn't want anybody to know that it was there. Not only because like I wanted to be a real man, right? But also because I had trauma around that area of my body that
Mhm.
was not resolved, that was not addressed during this time, that I didn't even know how to speak about
Yeah.
because I felt so intimidated.
This just sounds so exhausting to me, just, like, trying to constantly keep
It
up
was
these
just
appearances
issues
and
piling and piling and piling onto each
yeah.
other. It was such a train wreck. And I it was just a straight path from okay, therapist to a gender specialist, which basically just means I think like a psychologist who specializes in the area of gender and
Mhm.
refers people between services, and then finally being referred to the surgeon. There really wasn't like I had more pushback um trying to go on hormones than I
Mhm.
did for the surgery.
Really?
Yeah. Um
And that's, like, way less reversible, I feel like.
yeah. I mean, some of the effects of the hormones have been reversible for me, but obviously after you
Huh.
remove breast tissue, it's not coming back.
Yeah.
It's not going to come back. And I remember it was just a few days after my sophomore year of high school had ended. And I was very nervous the morning of.
Mhm.
Uh,
When you're
but I
about to
did, but
go get the
yeah,
surgery.
yeah.
Oh,
And I wasn't like having any second thoughts yet. But I remember being rolled in to the operating room And I was just like nervously trying to make small talk with all the nurses,
Mhm.
and my surgeon. And there was this young male nurse in the back of the room who was like preparing like some of the surgical instruments.
Mhm.
And the whole time he never took his eyes off of me. And he had this look on his face that I was just like, how the hell did I get myself in this situation? Like that's a kid that I'm operating on.
Yeah.
I I I often wonder where that nurse is now, if he's even still working in
Yeah.
medicine. I don't know if I witnessed what he did.
And how old
But
were you at this time?
I was
You
15.
you're 15.
I couldn't even legally drive yet by this point in
Gotcha.
time, and I was already already undergoing surgery.
Yeah.
Um, and when I first woke up, it was kind of funny actually because it was like an outpatient surgery. So like pretty much as soon as the medication wore off, I was free to go home.
Mhm.
And uh, I remember waking up like, man, like this is great. Like I'm fine. This is finally over. I'm gonna be able to heal, and once the scars and the skin grafts are finally healed, I'm gonna be able to take off my shirt like any other guy my age. I'm gonna be able to swim in the school pool shirtless. I'm gonna be able to go to the beach and not have to wear a shirt over my
Yeah.
chest anymore. It's not gonna be indecent anymore. I'm gonna look like every other guy. Um, which never happened, obviously, because I'm sitting here now, and
Mm.
it actually it only took like a few weeks for me to start changing my mind. Um, it was
Wow.
like a rough few months after that, because it's a very grueling surgery to recover from. Like you're not just taking out the breasts. Um, I mean, you're just taking out the breast tissue, but it's in an area where there's so much connective tissue, and it's in a very important area of the
Mhm.
body. It's the upper body. So I was basically disabled after coming out of
Wow.
the operating room. For 2 weeks, I had to have my mom like take time off of work to like help me, um, like do the
Just couldn't
dishes with
move
like
your
different
arms without pain.
household chores and stuff.
Yeah.
And I couldn't even like raise my arms up above my head till like the 2 or 3 month mark.
Wow.
I couldn't lift weights for a while. I couldn't even like lift boxes or anything like that.
Mhm.
Um, but I'd say like probably like a month in, I started to really fixate on my body again and compare myself to women again.
So you still have all the pain from the surgeries, you're still healing, and a month in, you start having these, doubts or these
Yeah.
questions
And at
about
first I thought it was like, oh, I just want to be pretty, but I don't want to be a girl. I just want to be a pretty and effeminate guy, maybe, which
Hmm.
what a hard life to live. Like to just throw myself into when I could just, I don't know, be a woman.
Yeah.
Like effeminate men do not have it easy. But eventually it progressed to wow, like I don't really know if I'm a guy anymore. Maybe I'm non-binary because I'm still trans, right? That's like an innate part of me, right? And it's never gonna go away, right? Obviously, I'm trans. They went through all this, and I'm 3 years into to doing this, so I can't just back out. I
Mhm.
didn't even know that detransition was a thing. I didn't know that regret was a thing because it was never spoken about during the process um, of getting these treatments at
Hmm.
all. Um, and also, like, it was just a very shameful thought of even remotely trying to reverse this because I was so far into it and my ego was getting the best of me a little bit.
Hmm.
But also because everybody around me was involved in this in some way. Like,
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
my mom and dad had to sign off on this, and I wanted to prove everybody in my life who pushed back on it wrong that I was going to be a young man. Um, and also to come back to everybody, to come back to my family and my friends, to tell them I was wrong all along about this.
Hmm.
It was just incredibly painful to think about, like the guilt that I would go through, especially with my parents.
Yeah.
Um, But in my junior year of high school, during the second semester, I took uh, a class in psychology, and towards the end of the unit, it was focused on like family and children. Um, and before this point in time, obviously, I was still growing up, right? I was still a kid, and so I wasn't thinking about having kids of my own. Um,
Sure.
but the more I learned about like childhood development and the process of child rearing,
Hmm.
the more apparent it became to me just how beautiful that is. And there was one particular section, I think it, it was about the Harlow experiments with the rhesus monkey infants, the cloth mother and the wire mother. I'm not sure if you're
I'm
familiar.
not familiar with that, no.
Um, let's see if I can pull back far enough into my memory to really describe it. But basically, like, there was this researcher um, who was experimenting on uh, monkey infants to see. So there were two surrogate mothers. One made out of like a wire cage, the other that was made out of like soft cloth.
Okay.
That was like very comfortable for them to like cling to,
Yeah.
and it was so messed up. It actually made me cry, like reading it at some
Yeah.
points because it was just so cruel. Like there were like some of the monkeys, like he would like physically separate from the mother,
Yeah.
and just like have her like behind like a glass cage, and they would just like go into like these little fits of distress because they couldn't cling to their mom,
Yeah. You
and he would
could.
do things like I think like he would like allow some of them to like nurse like through like the fake breasts. Some of them
Mhm.
he would not allow them to nurse and just like give them food otherwise, I think. And one of the key takeaways was like how important like nursing is for the development of the child, especially in terms of like their bond with their mother.
Yeah.
And I just had this moment of like, is this like a huge thing that I lost?
Hmm.
Like I'm not going to be able to breastfeed my kids, and I didn't know when I was going through the consultations just how like important that is.
Yeah.
Like
For sure.
it was like, oh my gosh, like I not only lost this myself, but my future children lost something.
Hmm.
And I just bawled my eyes out for weeks after this. Like I couldn't live with myself. I couldn't live with this epiphany that I had. That like I was 16 now,
Yeah.
and like adulthood was 2 years away, and I was gonna have to start thinking about what my adult life was going to look like, and that includes like I started asking myself questions like I haven't had a boyfriend yet, but
Hmm.
do I want to have do I want to get married one day? Like, what role would I want to fill in a marriage? Like, I don't really
Hmm.
know if I could be a husband because I'm still like pretty effeminate. I'm not that strong, and I want to naturally have children of my own one day.
Hmm.
And the more I thought about it, the more I came to terms with the fact that by transitioning, I was losing parts of myself, parts of my adulthood, parts of my life, some of the things that make life the most beautiful
Absolutely.
while I was still a child. And I knew that
Yeah.
I couldn't go on. I knew that I just couldn't
Jeez.
move forward with this.
And as just a child, you it's so hard to have that kind of perspective. Like I wasn't even near thinking about anything about family or children at 15. I was like playing video games and throwing basketballs at my friend's head. Like this this wasn't even on my radar. And you're being asked to make such a life-changing decision that young, and so many adults in your life I think let you down. And
Absolutely. I mean,
it's
I
really
felt so let down by every single one of my doctors who was involved in this process. And I felt like some sort of freak. Like I felt like a Frankenstein's monster, like a complete experiment. And I tried. I tried to go back to my doctors, not only like for help with like the grief and the trauma, but also to help with like some of the complications and like with guidance around like how to like stop taking the testosterone, for example.
Mhm.
And with each appointment that I had, the more I realized like I might as well be nothing to these people now. They're
Really?
not going to help me. And I pretty much had to figure out like the entire process of medically detransitioning all on my own. Um, I went off cold turkey off of testosterone, partly because like just I could not even fathom like looking at that needle again.
Yeah.
I didn't even want to not acknowledge that like it was in the cupboard.
Mhm.
Um, but also because I just didn't know how to stop. Like, is there like a means of tapering off of this? Like, is that even safe? Not that it
Mhm.
was safe to like just like completely stop it. It actually made me kind of sickly. Like I dropped like what like 25, 30ish pounds in a matter of like 2 months because I wasn't eating. I just wasn't hungry. I completely lost my appetite. And I
Yeah.
was super sickly for a really long time afterward.
Hmm.
Um and when it came to like the social aspect of detransitioning, that was that was just as hard. Um like I couldn't even face my mom and dad to tell them. Like I had to text them because I was sobbing and I didn't want them to see me in such a weak, such a vulnerable state because I wanted to be strong for them.
Yeah.
Um and for them, of course, like there was a lot of regret. There was a lot of guilt and
And like you said, they weren't like the ones pushing this from the beginning. They were
no, not at
trying to
all. Like they never
support
believed that I
you.
was transgender. They never believed that I was their son.
Yeah.
But they felt like they had no other option.
Mhm.
And even today, like, I feel like our family is not the same. Like, we had been so torn by this throughout the process,
Mhm.
and we're still like trying to pick up the pieces of of what came before. Um, I was going to my senior year of high school, and my friend group had just completely abandoned me. Um, and I can't blame them entirely because it was not easy dealing with me during that point in time. I was very emotional, I was very volatile,
Mhm.
very unstable, and like I literally wanted to kill myself every day. I wanted to
Wow.
die because I didn't think that I was going to have a life ahead of me. And I don't really know if you can expect like a bunch of like 16, 17, 18 year olds to know how to deal with somebody who's going through that.
Mhm.
But I also had like lost like a peer support group at a time when like I really desperately needed that.
Sure.
And it was also like over like some stupid like ideological disputes too. Because like once like I questioned and stopped my transition, I started to question like the entire thing,
Yeah.
amongst a bunch of other things, and they just wanted nothing to do with that.
Yeah.
A lot of people were just saying horrible things about me at school. There were like a lot of girls and a lot of like more, um, I guess like more liberally minded people at school who would say
Yeah.
like, oh, like she's saying all these terrible things, like she's she's a transphobe, she hates transgender people, she's using her experience to like leverage it over other transgender people, she's just a terrible person. And
Jeez.
also like I was really awkward during this time because I was
Yeah.
trying to like reintegrate into like a female role socially.
Yeah.
um so I looked very awkward because I was like fresh off of the testosterone.
Mhm.
So I still had a very deep voice. I still had like very like fairly masculine features.
Mhm.
Um, and like I was awkwardly growing my hair out. I had like a really bad dye job. And I was like the way that I was dressing, um, it was not the most modest. Like
Mhm.
I could easily get away with a dress code because like I didn't have breasts anymore and like I was like kind of underweight, so I didn't really have a whole lot of curves to speak of. But like I would wear like these really tiny like tank tops and skirts because I didn't know better. I just thought like,
Mhm.
okay, it's how like a girl my age dresses, and I want to have fun with that. I want to have like some freedom
Yeah. Yeah.
and like feel pretty and comfortable in my own skin
Yeah.
by showing an excess amount of skin.
Yeah.
And a lot of girls unfortunately do have phases like that. But um like I was getting into that like fairly late, and it was like
Mm.
the hard parts of the female high school experience were coming at me full force when I was just completely unprepared.
Mhm.
Like I didn't know it at the time, but a lot of people were avoiding me because there were rumors going around that like I was like the school whore, that I was like sleeping around with
Jeez.
different people. And the crazy thing was, I wasn't. I was not anywhere even near that.
Yeah.
Like I had lost all of my friends, and I spent like all of my breaks in my lunch period just like playing like on my Switch or like watching anime or
Mhm.
just like eating alone
Yeah.
in the corner of the school.
Jeez.
Like it was it got to the point that it was like I just this was like rock bottom for me. Like
Yeah.
I wasn't focusing at all on my studies because I didn't care anymore. I thought I was gonna like die before I hit 18.
Yeah.
And it was like, why am I even going to school if I don't have all the stuff I could just learn online or like from a textbook
Mhm.
at home? I have nobody to interact with.
Yeah.
Nobody even wants to be around me. So I just dropped out. I just dropped
Mhm.
out and I just took my state high school certificate. And I not only lost my friends in person, but I also lost like the support of an entire community that once was behind me.
Yeah.
And like as soon as I talked about my detransition, people just went straight for my throat online.
It's nasty out there.
Yeah, it was horrible. Like I started like I didn't have anywhere else to go to
Yeah.
because okay, like I had a therapist. I didn't feel like she was helpful at all. I wanted like somebody my age to like hear me out and
Mhm.
comfort me. So I just went to the online world. I just like spewed everything on there, like just
Mhm.
about how much pain that I was in. And
Yeah.
there were so many people who were like, "Well, you need to." I'm sure it's hard, but you need to take accountability for yourself. You did this to yourself. Like it doesn't matter that you're young. Like
Yeah.
you had to have been told about what this would entail. So it's all on you. And a lot of this was coming from like other transgender people.
Yeah.
I couldn't even talk about it in passing because they would get so angry at me. They would just tell me to shut up
Yeah.
and like just stop talking about it because I was harming the transgender community,
Yeah.
right?
Just by sharing how you're feeling, just by sharing what you're going through,
Yeah, they said all
just
these
by
awful things about me, and some of them would even like people that I didn't even know
yeah.
would go out of their way to harass me, like under my posts or like DM me and say things like, "Why are you trying to go back? Like you looked better as a guy. You're never gonna look like a woman ever again. So why
Mhm.
try?" Just all of these horrible, horrible things. The worst things that people could ever say to me ever.
Yeah.
Um, but I had this resolve to keep going. Like I never once thought about retransitioning because it was like I already knew what the transition process was like, and
Yeah.
it was horrific. And
Yeah.
sure, like for a while I found comfort in it, but comfort can only take you so far.
Yeah.
And like I knew like I was a very feminine woman and I wanted to embrace that and become a wife and a mother one day.
Mhm.
And I didn't know what was keeping me going forward, but
Hmm.
I just kept fighting. And I kept hoping that one day I'd be able to make real friends. I'd be able to have a real identity of my own that wasn't based in something stupid like
Yeah.
the medications that I took. And then I started to come across. I had this. It sounds like something out of a movie or something, but I had the word detransition just pop into my head one day,
Mhm.
and I wondered, is this a real thing? Like, am I the only one going through this? Because I can't just, I cannot be the only one. There has to be other people out there like me who, there has to be at least one other person who has regretted this. And I wonder, I wonder if people are talking about this. And surely enough, when I looked it up, there were articles written, there was discourse about this, And there's also like an entire community of other people who have detransitioned or ended up desisting before they went into the medical pipeline.
Yeah.
And it was a total game changer for the healing process for me. Um,
Hmm.
when I first started interacting with these other detransitioners, I was still like calling myself like, I don't know, like non-binary, he, they, she, or whatever, because I was so confused. Like, basically, the entire foundation of my life for the past 3 years before that
Hmm.
had just crumbled, but there was still bits and pieces that I had like of information that I had like siphon that I had to like
Yeah.
that I had to pick
A
through.
whole vocabulary stuck
Yeah.
in your head still.
And I was still like in the trans mindset.
Yeah.
Like I wanted to get like like all these different surgeries, uh, to fix the damage that had been done to my body. Right.
Yeah.
Like, thank God that I was still a minor and that I did not have any. I did not have an income then, because if I did, I might have had like I might have I don't know. I might have looked. I would probably look completely crazy today. I'd probably have like
Yeah.
lip injections or like I don't know, like Z cup boobs or like
Z-cup.
like a Brazilian butt lift or something. Because
Yeah.
I wanted to like I just wanted to absolutely just ruin my body with these cosmetic interventions because I thought
Hmm.
I was so ugly, and I thought that I wasn't gonna look any better. I thought that I was always just gonna look and sound like a little teenage boy.
Hmm.
And then like these older people who were detransitioning, they really gave me this sense of hope that one day things were going to get better, that I could heal from this, physically and psychologically, that there was a path forward from transitioning. And as comforting as these interactions and this sort of sense of solidarity with them was,
Yeah.
it was also like, oh my gosh, that's horrifying that I'm not the only one. And these are all adults who I was speaking to. There
Yeah.
was like the odd kid who had like gotten into it and they came back out of it before like they went on any drugs.
Sure.
But I knew like there were kids out there like me.
Yeah.
Like I knew that there were other children out there who were transitioned medically because
Yeah.
I had seen them like during the consultations.
Hmm.
So I thought, I mean, there has to be another kid who is going through the same kind of pain. And if they haven't come out of it yet, who's going to advocate for them? Who's going to speak for them?
Hmm.
And I could just like sit here and like mope around all day, but that's not going to accomplish anything.
Sure.
Somebody has to speak up about this. And I knew that I had the perfect opportunity to do so because I had that personal experience. And also, like, the discourse was starting to change around this in the media, just ever so slightly.
Yeah.
And I decided at 17 that I was going to begin speaking up about this
Hmm.
because I wanted to advocate not only for those other kids and those other men and women, but also to make sure that what happened to my family as well
Yeah.
would never happen again. I just had like a niece and a nephew come into the picture by that point in time, and I'm the youngest kid in my family, so I
Hmm.
never had that experience of having to like help raise another kid
Yeah.
or babysit or anything like that. And it was only then that like I realized just how beautiful innocence and childhood really is.
Hmm.
And it made me reflect on how my own innocence had been stolen from me from a very young age. And that I could never turn back, while I could never turn back the clock for myself, I wanted to help fight for a world where I wouldn't have to worry about like my little nieces and nephews and
Yeah.
maybe my own like future children and grandchildren, um, knowing even half of what I had to go through.
Yeah.
And I really was not expecting to get as big, to gather as much attention as I have now. It just started with a little Twitter account
Yeah.
back when it was still called that.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, and then all of a sudden, like I was being called to speak on like legislation, and then speak at churches, and then speak with all these different organizations.
Yeah.
And now, like, there's been so much change that has happened just within. I'm 20 years old now, so it's been less than 3 years,
Wow.
and I mean, so far, 26 states in the U.S. have passed measures of some sort to stop the transitioning
Yeah, yeah.
and the medical experimentation on children. And like there's also a lot of detransitioners and parents who have come out into the spotlight. Um, and I've had like a lot of parents and other people reach out to me saying like, you've given me so much hope, not only with like my own family, um, or with my own personal struggles with this, but also to begin speaking out about what I've been through.
Yeah,
And it's I never thought that I would make it this far. I never thought that I'd be speaking to basically the whole world about something that I thought was going to make me just a complete failure. And it's really just incredibly beautiful how just one voice speaking up can change the entire course of history.
absolutely.
Um, and I do believe that this movement that I'm a part of is something that is historical. This whole this whole thing is going to go down in history as one of the single greatest scandals in American healthcare.
Hmm.
I mean, this is even worse than the lobotomy, which was another physical treatment to address psychiatric issues.
Hmm.
It's the same concept, but with even further spreading consequences. An
Yeah,
entire generation of kids, an entire generation of young people is going to come out with parts of their bodies missing, with their health compromised, with their lifespan shortened, and having lost their ability not only to have healthy sexual lives,
hmm,
but also to um, mother or father children of their own.
yeah,
We don't even, I don't think we could even comprehend right now just how long the consequences are going to affect us for.
yeah. No, I agree. I've never heard that comparison between like lobotomies and this procedure, and yeah, I think it's a good one.
It's essentially a
It's,
sexual form of lobotomy
yeah,
because I think to some extent it does affect cognitive. Um, it does have cognitive consequences,
hmm,
especially like the puberty blockers. Like you're directly interfering with a child's development in literally every single way.
yeah,
Um, but the single biggest effect that it has on these patients who go through this, especially the younger that they go, is that they might never be able to have um, healthy sexual function, which is like a very important part of romantic relationships
sure,
and marriages for adults.
sure,
Um, but also to never be able to have children of your own.
yeah,
I mean, that is a lot to expect a child to consent to.
yeah,
But it's not only the children. It's also vulnerable adults who we are experimenting upon, who often have issues and trauma that started early in their childhood.
hmm,
These are not, regardless of whether we're dealing with adults or children with this, these are people who are not in their right mind. A mentally healthy person does not want to sterilize themselves.
hmm,
And these people who do, they're too traumatized. They're in too poor um, of a psychiatric state to be able to comprehend just the consequences of that this is going to have for their body down the line,
yeah,
and maybe even know whether they want to have children or relationships.
yeah, yeah. No, it's wild, and I have to say, I'm really thankful for people like you who are sharing your story. You're actually the first person I discovered who was talking about this once I encountered this ideology in graduate school, in universities. And then I was able to find your story. And I'm just really impressed by how you've been able to use some of that pain and those experiences and turn it around in a way that is so helpful because you know what it feels like to be that kid who just felt like, oh, I have all these things going on and people are calling me a transphobe, calling me a bigot for just, talking about how I feel. And
Right.
you're giving people a voice, and that's just incredibly powerful.
Right. I mean, I really hope to serve as that middle ground because um at least a few years ago, people would often gravitate between two extremes, either going all the way in the direction of affirmation, just affirm, affirm, affirm these people,
Hmm.
regardless of the consequences for them, or they would actually hate these transgender people or these people who are struggling with these feelings around their sex and are very clearly confused,
Yeah.
who are very clearly um, either traumatized or they are just not in their right minds.
Yeah.
I These are people who need to be shown compassion. And that doesn't look like mindless affirmation. That doesn't look like just giving them,
Sure.
administering them whatever treatment they want, because that's going to harm them. It's not going to help them at all. The entire premise of gender transition is a lie, and we are lying to these people. We're doing these kids a great disservice by allowing them to believe that the way that they're born is wrong and that they have to fix themselves, and the only
Mm.
way to do so is through experimental lifelong treatments.
Sure.
They deserve better. They deserve to be shown that they have another path, that they can conquer these feelings
Yeah.
without unnecessarily medicalizing their bodies.
Sure.
And I feel like it's created like this by people like me coming out, and all these doctors, these whistleblowers, these parents who have struggled with this with their children, or have even like lost custody of their children coming out. It's created this space um to talk about this more openly and in a more sensible manner. I also wanted to, you mentioned that you encountered this ideology um, in college and in university, and I want to ask, like, how how did they present this to you? Was it like in class? Was it like in the curriculum?
Yeah. Have you ever heard the phrase like social construction, and uh, another one was conceptual engineering?
I've heard of the former, but what is latter?
So conceptual engineering, it's like some of the project that some of these philosophers, like professional university professors, and all sorts of people, not just philosophers in different areas. I was just a philosophy student, so that's what I'm most familiar with.
Okay.
But they talk about how they're using uh, and updating language in order to accomplish like social goals, and that's their vision and view of progress. And so yeah, there's some
Very
even
Orwellian.
yeah, it was very trippy for me to encounter. It was a lady I read a whole paper talking about how the definition of woman, we should stop thinking about it in traditional ways, and the definition of woman should be like any individual who is oppressed along these lines.
But it's such a circular line of thinking because
Yeah.
it's like, okay, so if being a woman isn't rooted in one's physiology, where does that come from? What are you identifying with?
That's a great question.
And it's usually just gender stereotypes.
Yeah.
It's just effeminate men who want to dress up and partake in a more
Yeah,
feminine
yeah,
role,
for sure.
but they could do that
Yeah.
without making it their entire identity. But
Yeah.
unfortunately, we made it so that the transgender movement claims that it's working to break gender roles, but it's actually strictly enforcing them by
Mm.
allowing these individuals who are not necessarily conforming to the roles expected to their sex to believe like, okay, that makes it so that I'm not actually a man, or I'm not actually a woman. I have to change myself.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a nice segue into something I've been wanting to talk to somebody about who has some more familiarity with this sector and this ideology. I've just been thinking about these topics, and I always try to think: is there any kernels of truth in what people are saying? I think about this with even like religions that I think are false, or movements that I think are false, or any sort of ideology in a whole bunch of different topics. I think, why are so many people buying into this and is, are they saying anything true? Because usually the most effective lies come when there's at least a kernel of truth there that makes them far more persuasive. They, take hold in a cultural setting. And so, yeah, I'm wondering to hear your perspective, and then I'll share mine on if there's anything that this community is getting right, even though there's still this underlying lie that you can change sex.
That's actually a really good question that I haven't been asked before, and I'm really
Mm,
glad that you asked that. Um, and I absolutely do think that there are some truths to the dogma around this ideology, because it's very contradictory.
mhm.
It's the entire premise is a lie, but there are some parts of it that are that I think are true that are truthful. Um, I think the main one would be that men and women should have more room for self expression. There should be more
Sure.
room in our world, in our culture, for people who do not strictly conform to sex based roles. Um, I personally think that the traditional roles of men and women are very important. Um, I think that a healthy society is one where most women are feminine and most men are masculine figures, but everybody has some variation.
Sure.
And there are some people who are outliers.
Absolutely.
And it's not easy sometimes. It's not always easy to be a butch woman or a very effeminate man,
Hmm.
especially if you're an effeminate man. The world can just be incredibly cruel to you.
Yeah.
And I think that these individuals should be allowed to express themselves um, through however they want to.
Yeah.
And that, of course, we should find a means of making room for these people in our world without convincing them that they need um, unnecessary medical interventions.
Yeah.
But in a way, it gives these people a means of confidently building their identities and presenting themselves to the
Hmm.
world.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Have you ever thought about how, I think you mentioned the word tomboy earlier today,
Yeah.
and how girls, will wear guys' clothing, whatever, or do stuff with the guys. I Is there even a word like that in the other direction?
Um, well, some people use the word femboy, but unfortunately, it's a term with like a very sexual connotation.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So there's
It's
not
basically
just.
like a pornography category,
Oh,
unfortunately,
gotcha.
which it really sucks for those guys who really do just like to
Yeah.
wear like feminine clothing
Yeah.
and act femininely. So I've also
Yeah.
heard people say the word tom girl, but I don't think most men want to call themselves
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
girls. And if they do, that's a
Yeah.
red flag.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. But yeah, I'm actually pretty because I'm very on board with everything you're saying about the ideology in terms of like transitioning from male to female being a completely nonsense idea. But I'm actually pretty dang open minded when it comes to like forms of self expression in clothing. Like I was in Scotland for a bit. Me and my buddy went to this like tournament where these big burly Scottish dudes, like hairy, strong, 300-pound men,
were they in
they
kilts?
were in kilts. And I
I
don't
mean,
care
if
what
you
you say,
think
it's a
about it,
skirt.
if you think about it, a lot of cultures have uh, like male skirts,
Yeah.
and it's more practical for guys because, well, I don't need to say much.
Wait, no, I don't get it.
It's more practical for guys because you need like a little bit more space than what's
It is
like
nice.
pants might
It is
sometimes
nice to have some
allow,
breathing room. I hear you. I hear you loud and
and it's
clear.
breezy. It's nice.
Yeah, but so there's some of those things where I realize it's like I know this is just like a cultural arbitrary thing, but I think a lot of males, if they were to walk into some parts of society with a dress and maybe they fell in love with the look of dresses, they're not trying to deceive anybody about their sex or anything, but they're just like expressing themselves in this way. It's
Hmm.
like a healthy version of cross dressing rather than this like having to work to try to trick people thing.
Hmm.
I think there's not a lot of support for people like that.
Right. I mean, I think that unfortunately people who are on the extreme ends of like being like a very, very masculine woman or being like a very feminine man will all probably always be ostracized and kind of like
Hmm.
sidelined in some way.
Hmm.
But I think we have to make an effort to really just meet those people where they're at and accept them as people.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I have a couple. I'm going to do some rapid fire session with you right now, if that's
Oh,
okay.
okay.
I have a lot that I want to ask you. Um, so, one question that is a big part of this podcast actually is about compassionate disagreement. So, I'm a big advocate of like being able to disagree with somebody and still being able to like maintain a connection with them because
Yeah.
there's often so much more that like unites two people, but they might have drastically opposing ideas. And so first I wanted to ask, like, how has that been for you? Because you're such an outspoken advocate on these issues. Like, do you have people in your life who like disagree with you on this,
Mm.
but you're still able to connect it all? Or is it hard because you are so outspoken on these issues and a lot of folks don't take well to that?
Well, I mean, yeah, there are some people in my life, like family members, for example,
Yeah.
who disagree with me on this very strongly,
Yeah.
but are still they're willing to agree to disagree,
Yeah.
um, and maintain our relationship because, I mean, family comes first before politics, before ideology. Um, but a surprising lot of people don't, and it's so weird that this ideology is just the way that it divides people. Even even I've lost like good friends
Hmm.
over disagreements to this, and it's completely one sided. Like I love to hear people out, even if I don't agree with them,
Yeah.
but a lot of people just don't want to offer the same, and I feel like it's a consequence of this culture that we live in now that is very we kind of idolize politics and different ideologies in a way,
Hmm.
particularly like people on the left when it comes to identity politics. They cling
Yeah.
on to it so hard. It becomes such an essential part of their worldview that if anybody remotely disagrees with them, they just
Yeah.
it's some of them even like hate people.
Absolutely. What's some of the messaging like in that community? You know, like in other segments of society, I think of like Christians have a saying, it's uh, love the sinner, hate the sin. This is like a saying in a lot of Christian segments of society,
Yeah.
and other places are like, all right, it's okay to agree to disagree. What is the messaging like in the trans community towards like if they're talking to someone in the community and they're talking about, oh, your parent doesn't affirm you in this, um, should do they say, you know, all right, that's okay. This is just, you know, an area where you disagree. You have plenty to connect with your parents and family and friends, and you should make sure that you stay plugged in and able to hear their other
So
perspectives.
individuals like that are actually in the minority in most of the mainstream transgender community. Um, I mean, that's pretty much the mindset that I was going into when I was transitioning. Like, I knew that my mom and dad and a lot of my family probably wouldn't be 100% on board with it. And I knew that most of my peers wouldn't be either
Yeah.
because, well, I was in middle school.
Hmm.
Kids between the ages of like 11 to 14, they're not nice.
No.
They're not nice. If you're different, they are going to bully the hell out of you.
Yeah.
And they were not very nice to me when I first started out. Um, but I feel like there has been such a huge cultural shift in the transgender community
Hmm.
to the point that it's basically like affirm or die. Like this, like
Yeah.
if somebody doesn't affirm you, they'll in your identity, they'll like tell you to like sometimes like a lot of time they'll actually like encourage you to cut them off entirely or to just like ruin your relationship with them over this.
Yeah. That's wild. And that makes having, you know, that's why I feel like a lot of people are scared to talk about this because maybe they've had that done to them or they've seen this happening play out around them.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
so they're
part of it
afraid.
does come part of the reason why that mindset has perpetuated so much within the community is because there are people out there who legitimately have been ousted. People have who have been abused or neglected or even like kicked out of the house
Hmm.
just for presenting to their very strict parents and
Yeah.
trying to like open up with a heart to heart to them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's incredibly tragic. But those stories are in the minority. And now like the idea is like if your parents disagree with you at all, they're denying you like a fundamental part of yourself. And you need to like get them out of your life or like try to convince them as much as possible.
Yeah. That is wild. I heard recently, correct me if I'm wrong, were you on the topic of like not being able to handle disagreement or different perspectives? I heard you were like kicked out of some event recently, like some Society of American Society of Pediatrics or
Yeah,
something
it was
like
the
that,
American
or
Academy of
uh,
Pediatrics, which is a major organization run by like a bunch of like different pediatricians and medical organizations.
yeah,
Um, and we managed to get a booth there.
yeah,
Uh, we had to go undercover a little bit and just like slowly ramp up the messaging.
yeah,
It started with like a general discussion around mental health, and then on day two, we started to go in really hard on the whole gender thing. Um, and you know what's crazy? Um, and this was actually my exact experience last year. Most of the pediatricians and the people coming in um, to talk to us, um, they either didn't know about what was happening or they were completely against the transitioning of children. And those who didn't know, upon learning about what the process would actually entail and what it would actually mean for these kids undergoing this, they were completely in opposition to it.
hmm,
So most people who we spoke to were very, very supportive,
hmm,
very supportive of us.
yeah,
Um, and I left a day early, so I wasn't there when the booth ended up getting kicked out. Um, but all of a sudden, like in the middle of the day, on the last day of the conference, um, the security just came up to the members of the booth who were still there, and they said, "Hey, like you got to skedaddle. Like you got 10 minutes to get out of here."
wow,
And they didn't tell them why,
really,
or I think they did at some point, and it was like, "Well, you guys were here last year, and people felt threatened by your presence here, so we can't have you here again."
yeah, oh,
But the funny thing about that is, I was the only member who was there last year, and it was with an entirely different group.
yeah,
So I guess they just, I'm too recognizable, dude. Like people, like sometimes, like I'll be in my hometown, just like getting like a milkshake or something. I'll be like out getting groceries with mom and dad, and somebody will come up to me and be like, Are you the Jordan Peterson girl?" But I was like, I was trying not to get noticed too easily at the convention.
yeah, yeah,
Um, but I guess since somebody saw me there, they immediately alerted the staff there,
yeah,
and they were not happy about us just simply speaking the truth about what is going on in
yeah,
pediatrics.
yeah,
And there's a reason why they don't want us there. I mean, this is something that has flown completely under the noses of the American people, and also even like a lot of like doctors. And that's
hmm,
part of why this has spread and this issue has become uh, as dangerous
hmm,
as 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 it has, because so many people didn't know the truth about what was actually going on. They thought it was just like,
yeah,
oh, people doing like silly like clown makeup and clown hair and like calling themselves like
yeah,
different pronouns, and
yeah,
not, oh, we're disfiguring children and taking away their healthy body parts and function.
yeah,
Um, they know that most doctors, most people, when they learn the truth about what is going on, what is actually being done to children in my generation,
hmm,
they will not stand for this.
hmm,
And that's why they want to hide it. That's why they want to silence the voices of people like me,
Yeah.
of concerned doctors, of concerned patients who have already been through this and know what it's really like.
Yeah. That's rough. It's such a cheap trick too. It's like I noticed you said they'll accuse you of like violence of for just being there, sharing these perspectives, and that's just it's a really clever tactic. It makes it seem like in that moment, like you're on the offensive and you're putting this person on the back foot by accusing them of these crazy things like violence, transphobia, bigotry, and all these accusatory things. And so it can shut people up in the moment, but
Eventually, after using it so much, it loses its meaning.
absolutely. Yeah. And you're not convincing them. I think people, if they've been accused of something like this, they just, you know, maybe clam up, but you haven't changed their mind.
Uh-huh.
And so that's why
Right. I
I
mean,
just,
it's nothing more than an intimidation tactic. And a few
yeah,
years ago, it actually was very effective.
yeah,
There were detransitioners out there like me who were speaking up, but they left because the backlash was so horrible and because it had such a profound effect on
yeah,
such a profound negative effect on their lives and their mental state just to talk about it.
yeah.
But our culture has changed so much
Wow.
that now, like, there has been a major shift, and we are able to talk about this in a more open setting.
Yeah,
Um, and now, like, all of these stupid words like transphobe or turf, people
yeah,
just
yeah,
see them as playground insults. They're seeing these people's character for what it really is.
yeah, yeah. No, it is pretty wild. What do you think has brought about that change? What's been so different a few years? Are people just tired of this, or what do you think has ushered in this change in the last couple of years?
Yeah, I mean, people in general have just grown so tired of all the BS, like
Yeah,
being expected to just go along with all these different things. Part of it is that like people like me have come to light talking about it.
yeah,
That's a very big part of it. But also like it's kids that we're
mm,
messing with.
mm-hmm.
It's children who are being harmed. And even indirectly, like girls and college women and women in general even are having to deal with the consequences. They're being endangered by males entering their spaces in schools, in
Yeah,
like public pools, in locker rooms, in restrooms, and
yeah,
threatening their safety. You don't mess
hmm.
with women, and you certainly do not mess with girls and boys in a world filled with mama bears and papa bears.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that things are changing. I'm glad that you feel like, well, I don't know if you feel this way, but it sounds like maybe the onslaught of abuse is dialing down slowly towards you.
And if anything, it kind of propels me forward. It's like
Yeah.
it's kind of funny. It's kind of like a free form of entertainment. And usually like I have like pretty good enough security to like not have anything crazy happen.
Yeah.
But it's like it shows me that it only makes me think I'm right more and more. Just the way that people freak out over me just talking about
Yeah.
my experience.
If you're not getting a good argument in response, and instead you're just getting
Right.
yells and
Right.
anger. And
And it's a tale as
yeah.
old as time. Like if you're fighting for an important cause, if you're fighting for the truth is painful. So there are going to be a lot of people out there who will not like it.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Well, Chloe, I'm just really thankful for you, like I told you before, and what you're doing. I'll also say that you're a very articulate person,
Thank you.
and I really appreciate that. I've actually seen you in some interviews too, in doing research for this episode. I've seen you mid interview take a second, say, "Hold on, let me think about this," and
I
just
get kind
look
of
at the
conscious
sky.
about it because it's like I worry that like I'm a slow thinker.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate people who slow down a little bit. And I know when you do get around to giving the response that it's a really thoughtful and meaningful one. So that's one reason why I reached out to you and wanted to have this conversation. And yeah, I'm just thankful for you coming out today and for what you're doing in the world.
And thank you
And
for having
yeah,
me. This is probably like the
absolutely.
most unique show that I've been on for in a
Really?
little while, actually, because most people don't usually dive into like the more philosophical, ideological aspect of it, and they mostly just ask about my experience rather than like focusing me like maybe a little bit more on my thoughts now on the issue.
Mhm. Gotcha.
So
Well,
it's greatly
glad.
appreciated.
Good, good. I'm glad you enjoyed your time. Well, thanks for coming, Chloe, and hopefully we get to see you again soon.
Appreciate you having me.